Hey there, geeks and geekettes. Let's review
Resident Evil
Village. Resident Evil Village, the 8th in the Resident Evil main line franchise, continues the story of Ethan Winters, a new protagonist from Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. This time, Ethan is trying to find his kidnapped daughter in a village that's basically full of monsters. So this game has been my most anticipated game of 2021. I've had a few games in the last year and none of them were anywhere near what I wanted them to be, including Marvel's Avengers, Call of Duty, Cold War Black Ops, Cyberpunk, and even Assassin's Creed Valhalla. None of those games were what I wanted them to be, nowhere near as good as they should have been. Resident Evil, the franchise, is my all-time favourite gaming franchise, even more so than Call of Duty, which I'm more sort of known for playing. I'm old enough to have played the original game first time around on the PlayStation. I remember how terrifying that game was back in the day, and how good the graphics were for the time. I mean, now they look awful, but at the time it was a game changer. It was the first horror survival game that I was aware of, and I think it was the first big horror survival game. That first game hooked me into the series. Resident Evil 2 was outstanding. Resident Evil 3 was great. Resident Evil 4 was my favourite game for a long time. Resident Evil 5 I enjoyed and a lot of people didn't. Resident Evil 6 is the only Resident Evil game I never finished. I actually took it back the same day I bought it. Unplayable, didn't enjoy it at all. I thought I was done with the franchise. The game sucked and I thought it was going to kill the franchise because there were 2 weak entries. And then luckily Resident Evil 7 Biohazard hit the reset button. It felt like a standalone game and a return to form, and it returned to its horror survival roots as opposed to the way the action had taken precedence. In fact, Resident Evil 7 is not only the scariest Resident Evil game I've ever played, it's one of the scariest games I've ever played, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the horror of that game. I loved the tension and the creepiness. I loved the switch to the first person shooter mode as opposed to over the shoulder cameras. It made the game feel more intense, more real, and it put you in the game. You felt more part of the game, like you were taking part in the story. I will do a separate video and I'm going to rank all the mainline Resident Evil games because I didn't play a lot of the side games. I think I played Resident Evil Code Veronica. I think that was about it. This review is about Resident Evil 8 The Village. So by now I've obviously completed the game, as have a lot of people, and that's why I held back on my review, because there'll be spoilers in with the clips that are being played and there'll be spoilers in what I talk about. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to spoil this for anyone, so spoiler warning, there will be spoilers throughout this review. So I've allowed the game to settle in my mind before this review. I've gone back through my VODs from twitch.tv/BetaGeekLive, shameless little plug, because I played the entire game on stream across 4 different streams, and I also wanted to see my initial reactions to the game as well. Evil 8 is a direct follow-up to Resident Evil 7, and we again see the Resident Evil world through Ethan Winters' eyes. More on him a bit later. We get deeper into his story and we see how Resident Evil 7 plays into the overarching story of the Resident Evil franchise, and it links 7 to the rest of the games, where 7 felt like a standalone game for the time when it was out. The only thing that linked Resident Evil 7 to the rest of the games was the addition of a very skinny looking Chris Redfield at the end, and again, more on him later. Off the bat, Resident Evil 8 is far more action orientated than Resident Evil 7. It's certainly far less scary on the most part, and this was done on purpose because the game devs and the game writer wanted to include a bigger audience, because Resident Evil 7, they had complaints people couldn't finish the game because it was too intense and too scary for them. They wanted the biggest game that they could get, and I understand that. I understand why they want a bigger game and a bigger audience. Money. And as much as I understand it, I don't agree with it, because the Resident Evil games for me should always be horror first, action second. And for a long time they lost that. They lost it, started to lose on Resident Evil 4. 5 was action, 6 was action. The horror always seemed to take a back seat, which shouldn't be the case in a horror survival game. Where Resident Evil 7 felt more like a standalone and felt a little bit closer to the original, Resident Evil 8 Village is far more in the vein of Resident Evil 4, a game that I loved. Does the game work? Does the game find the balance between the action and the horror? Is the story good? Is this an awesome entry into an awesome franchise, which on the whole has been brilliant with the odd misstep? And in short, absolutely, this game is awesome. So I'm going to do this review a bit different to how I've done movie reviews before. I don't think I've ever done a video game review. The positives. This game to me is the perfect mix of Resident Evil Biohazard and Resident Evil 4. It had the atmosphere, the look and the tone of Biohazard while being more action-packed like Resident Evil 4. The settings evolve from the village to a castle to a factory to a water level to borderline haunted house. There are far more variety of enemies in this game than the previous installment. This game is more about waves of enemies and bigger, badder enemies than just the lurching sort of mold monsters from Resident Evil 7. There are groups of lycans, there are groups of zombies, vampires, witches. It just feels like this game is of Resident Evil Biohazard, and this feels like a much bigger game than what 7 was. 7 was condensed into a house and then a boat at the end with a little tiny bit in between, and Resident Evil 7 only really had the 4 Baker family bosses, and one of them wasn't really that much of a boss. The boss battles in this game are far better than Biohazard. Biohazard peaked really early with the Jack Baker fights. There were a few, but the one where he had the sort of scissors, the scissor chainsaws, that fight was brutal, intense. It took me hours to work out how to beat him on quite an easy setting, and that's something we'll get into a bit later as well. Those Jack fights were brilliant, except for the generic Jack is mutated, shoot the eyes dotted all over his body, typical Resident Evil fight, though, shoot the orange glowy bits. The mini-boss battles in this game I've really enjoyed. There's some really good mini-boss battles, and the main boss battles, they don't peak early. They feel like they progress as you go through the game. There is a little bit of peaking early. We'll get to that in a little while in the negatives. The boss battles feel huge and cinematic, and they're all different types of boss battles. There's different ways to defeat the different bosses in this game. They try to outdo the previous battles, and on the most part that works. There is a boss battle that is quite short and very different to the others, and I've seen that some people weren't happy with it, and for me it was the best boss battle in the game because it was the scariest part of the game. There are generic shoot them in the face until they die sections to the game, but it's Resident Evil. And that boss battle I just mentioned, the scariest game of hide and seek I have ever played in my life. Ethan Winters is genuinely a character in this game, whereas in the previous game he was a blank slate. You knew nothing about him, you never saw anything other than his hands. In this you don't see his face. In this you get more speech from him, more of a character, more character development, more story, and that sort of allows you to treat him as a main or a core character to the Resident Evil franchise. They didn't quite get it right, but it's a lot better than it was. In the previous game he felt like he was just a character for us to walk around this dirty house of horrors, whereas in Village he is a fleshed out character. The character grows, and that's a good thing, but the game still leaves enough of Ethan out for us to feel like we're in his place, that we're in the story. Not ever seeing Ethan's face, even in this game. I think it plays its part in immersion? In the immersion of you into the character. And this time he does have a presence in the game. The village itself, it plays like a central hub to the game and the main bosses. You have to use the village to progress through the game. and it fleshes the game out, and it's almost its own sort of character that branches off into the boss battles and into the boss levels. Although this game is more linear than you realise when you first play it. When I rewatched the VODs back, I was like, actually this game was very linear, really. It just gives you the illusion of being sort of free roam. So the pacing and the story of this game are incredible. Each chapter focuses around one of the 5 main bosses, and each are different enough that you never get bored or feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. And that's not just because each boss fight plays different, but because the areas, the aesthetics to the areas, the aesthetics to the bosses are so very different to each other. And unlike Resident Evil 7, there's no early peak where there isn't another battle that tops the first boss battle. Again, Jack and his scissor chainsaw, that was never topped in the rest of that game. The game looks absolutely stunning. It looks amazing. I'm on an Xbox One S, not even the Series X, and the game looks beautiful. I have seen next gen gameplays and wow, the game is stunning. It looks so good. I'd go as far as to say this is one of the best looking games I have ever played on any console, and to see PC footage of it is something else again. On an older generation console now, so no dropped frames, no graphic glitches, no rendering issues, no dubbing sort of issues which I've seen on other games. Just such a good looking game. The sound in this game is immense. Now Resident Evil games, or the newer Resident Evil games, they're meant to be played with a headset on like this, where it cancels out any noise around you and it immerses you fully into the game. The sounds through this headset, they just up the creep factor on everything. You can hear people walking around corners, you can hear werewolves, or you can hear the Lycans in the corners growling, or up on roofs howling to other Lycans to bring another wave of enemies at you. The footsteps of a certain tall lady hunting you down, it all resonates through the headset so well, and genuinely it'll make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The cries of a mutated baby, more on that a little bit later. The voice acting was spot on. I mean, there's always cheese in the Resident Evil games, but they managed to for a ridiculous story, really, they managed to play it really well with good voice acting. The sound design plays into the horror survival of the title. Absolutely phenomenal. Another pro would be Easter eggs. There were so many Easter eggs in this game that hark back to the original games and everything beyond it. You get Heisenberg referring to Chris Redfield as a boulder punching asshole, and if you've played Resident Evil 5, you would have laughed at that like I did.
No! Mama Lordy! That boulder punching asshole! But you're first!
This game links itself through Easter eggs to the origins of Resident Evil and the origins of Umbrella, the origins of the T-Virus and beyond. And there is so much in this game to remind you of Resident Evil 4, down to things like flashing diamonds in the ceilings. You shoot them out, you collect them. There's just the right amount of fan service here for fans of other games in the franchise across all the other games, without it ever being overbearing or taking you out of the game too much. And there are moments and things said in the game that will remind you of older games, and you can't help but smile to yourself. And the final positive, the return of the merchant. I loved the merchant in Resident Evil 4. This is not the same merchant, he's a different merchant.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
Got something that might interest you. What are you buying? Is that old string? Thank you.
But from that clip you've just seen, he uses a phrase from Resident Evil 4 and then says about it being an old friend. I loved that line. It was another really good Easter egg to take you back through the franchise. But this time the merchant, the Duke, he's his own character altogether. He helps in gameplay, or he advises you and helps you through the story. He helps with gameplay by upgrading your weapons, your ammunition. You can kill animals in the village, take the animals to him where he can make meals. He'll give you a list of what he needs to make meals, and that can in turn upgrade your health, your stamina, your speed. And you're always kind of guessing about him. For a long time I'm like, this guy could be one of the villains. He could turn out to be a failed member of the Five, and I didn't know where they were going to go with him. It kept me guessing, and that's a good thing. And I love the fact that this guy just kept popping up in the most random places and providing help to you. It just added another layer to this amazing story. Onto the mixed aspects of the game. The toned down horror factor. Because some people got too scared of Resident Evil 7, they toned back the horror. And that did bug me a little bit. It's an 18 plus rated video game. It's for adults, and they dumbed it down a bit because people got too scared of the Baker family. And that's not to say that this game isn't scary. As I mentioned earlier, the scariest game of hide and seek. The dollhouse and the mutant baby level on this were absolutely terrifying, and is my favourite boss battle in this game just because of the sheer terror involved. And here's the clip.
Me! I think I just pulled something. No, no, no! Whoa.
And also Chris Redfield. He looks more like the Chris Redfield from the games than the skinny pound shop version we got at the end of Resident Evil 7. He's a big beefy guy again. He acts, looks and sounds more like the Chris Redfield that I've grown up playing as. His action-packed sequence did feel just a tad overpowered. I say a tad, it was pretty much Neo at the end of the first Matrix. Even saying that, it's great to play as Chris Redfield again, being a long-term fan of this franchise. Onto the negatives, and there's not that many for me, and I'm quite the grumpy guy when it comes to video games, especially video game franchises that I love. Ethan, now he grows as a character, but it made no sense not to show his face right at the end of the game. They should have showed his face, and I feel like I could have been better engaged and invested in where the next story goes, even though Ethan's probably not in the next one because, spoiler alert, he dies. But a face to go with a personality could have cemented him as a main player in the Resident Evil franchise alongside Jill Valentine, Leon Kennedy, Ava, Chris, etc. The end scene that I watched, if you're on PC you can zoom right in and use some sort of photograph mode and you can see Ethan's face, but if it wasn't in the game I wasn't meant to see it, I can't be asked to look for it. The marketing of this game, holy shit did they lie to us with this game. Lady Dimitrescu was shown to be the overall big bad villain of the game. She was at the very least shown to be a Mr. X type protagonist that was going to be hunting you down all the way through this game. I thought she was going to be just like relentlessly pursuing me, and then you'd hear her walk in and know that she was back. But that's not what happened. She had roughly less than a quarter of the game dedicated to her, and she's a one and done boss fight. You fight her daughters, you kill her daughters who are mini bosses. They're not that difficult to beat. You avoid Lady Dimitrescu until it gets to a point where you fight her. She's killed off quite easily, and that's it. That's her done with the game, and I was really disappointed after everything that they had put in the advertising. That was it for her, for the face of the game and the marketing. She wasn't in there very long. I mean, the boss fights were fun, they were great, but there was not enough Lady D in the game for my personal taste. She was built up to be bigger, badder than what she was, and you can't help but feel a little bit cheated by the marketing and the way they did that. Heisenberg is a great villain, and he really does stand out as a villain, and they should have used him more in the advertising. My only issue with Heisenberg was he sounded like Nick Cage going full Nick Cage in like The Wicker Man or something.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes!
In fact, I think I called him a pound shop Nicolas Cage twice while I was playing the game. Just this sort of overacting voice. It suits the character, it suits the game, but I lost a little bit of immersion when I'm like, this guy sounds like Nicolas Cage. But overall, he's a great character, and the fights with him are really, really good. I even enjoyed the big tank fight. Yeah, a tank fight. The dollhouse level was intense. Scary as hell. The only negative from that is that character had no development and no character to her. You sort of deal with this doll, and then that's done. And the fish guy, Moreau, unfortunately a generic Resident Evil boss. He's a mutant, he mutates further, you shoot him in the face till he dies. The final boss, unfortunately, had nowhere near enough character development. There's enough through the game, through reading stuff that you find, but as for her part in the game that you physically get involved with and see, it's a bit off. Little bit of a letdown there. She just came across as a bit underwhelming. And the final negative for this game, for a Resident Evil game, this thing was far too easy. Resident Evil 4, there were parts I was stuck on for ages. Resident Evil 7, I couldn't beat Jack. It took me ages to work out how to beat Jack in the garage, and then Jack with the chainsaw, and then Jack's wife, and she was terrifying. In fact, the first time I died in this game was to the third boss, the fish guy, and I didn't die to the boss, I died to the puzzle to get to the fight with him because I couldn't get my timing right. I completed this game, I died 3 times in total. Two of them to fish guy, one of them to some crazy propeller monster. And I'm genuinely disappointed that I didn't try this game in a harder difficulty starting off, but I'm so used to Resident Evil games not giving me bullets, not giving me health, and being so difficult I've got to turn the difficulty down to complete it, because I'm not the greatest gamer. All that being said, overall I'm really, really impressed with this game. Even with those negatives, I absolutely loved this game. And I will be returning to it for a second playthrough on the harder difficulties, and some trophy hunting. I know there's some things that I missed in this game that I want to go back and find. For Resident Evil fans, I think this game is a must buy. You must have it, you must play it. It plays such a huge part in the story, going back to before Resident Evil, and it's just so enjoyable and action-packed and scary. I really, really enjoyed this game. It's the perfect blend of Resident Evil 4 and 7, which are 2 of my 3 favourite games of the franchise. This play just, it plays so well, and it is a lot of fun. What it misses in the pure terror from Resident Evil 7, it makes up for in over-the-top action sequences, set pieces, while still remaining original to the true format of Resident Evil and the concepts behind Resident Evil. So for me, 9.5 out of 10. This is easily, for me, the best game released in the last 2 to 3 years. So please like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think of this video game review. It's definitely the first one on this channel. If you'd like to see me review more video games, let me know in the comment section down below. If you want to see me playing video games live and having a bit of fun in with the chat and the audience, I'm live on twitch.tv/beardedgeek live. I'm live 4 times a week. I've been the Bearded Geek. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I shall catch you again soon in another review or an unboxing video.